In July 2025, a team of divers attached cables to a block of stone weighing 80 tons and lifted it off the floor of the Mediterranean. It had been down there for over 600 years. That block used to belong to a building 330 feet tall, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. But here's what almost nobody talks about. The lighthouse wasn't the impressive part. The lighthouse was just the doorman. Behind it sat a harbor engineered to hold over 1,000 ships, a shipyard that built the largest warships human beings had ever constructed, a library that tried to collect every book that existed anywhere on Earth, and an entire city laid out on a grid with mathematical precision, centuries before most of the ancient world built in straight lines at all. Every scene in this video is an AI-generated reconstruction, built to put you inside Alexandria around 200 BC, deep into the Ptolemaic Golden Age, decades before Rome's shadow started falling over Egypt. This is the story of the greatest port the ancient world ever built, and why archaeologists are still pulling pieces of it out of the sea 400 years after it disappeared. Most ancient cities grow the way a tree grows. One street added onto the last, shaped by whatever terrain happened to be there. Alexandria wasn't grown, it was drawn. In 332 BC, Alexander the Great picked a strip of Egyptian coastline that had almost nothing going for it naturally. No river mouth, no sheltered bay, just a narrow limestone ridge facing a small offshore island called Pharos. He picked it anyway for the geometry. That ridge and that island, connected properly, could form 2 harbors side by side instead of one. Alexander never saw it built. He died 9 years later, thousands of miles away in Babylon. It was his successors, the Ptolemies, the Greek dynasty that inherited Egypt when his empire split apart, who actually laid the city out, and they laid it out on a strict rectangular grid, wide straight avenues crossing at right angles, a plan so precise that Roman visitors centuries later still commented on how a person could stand at one gate and see clean through to the other side of the city. Nothing about Alexandria was accidental. Every street existed because someone with a ruler decided it should. The sea wasn't scenery in Alexandria. It was the entire point. The harbor could reportedly shelter more than 1,000 vessels at anchor at once, receiving grain barges down the Nile, cedar from the Levant, ivory from Nubia, and sending back glassware, papyrus, and grain by the shipload to feed cities all the way across the Mediterranean. Tucked into the harbor's western side sat an enclosed fortified basin called the Kaibotos, the box, lined with an arsenal and dockyard where the Ptolemaic navy built ships nobody has matched since. Ptolemy IV commissioned a warship called the Tessaraconteras, the 40, reportedly rowed by 4,000 men and over 400 feet long. Ancient writers openly argued about whether something that size could even survive open water. Here's what made it work, though. Unlike Rome, which held its empire together with legions garrisoned in every province, the Ptolemies held theirs together with ships and contracts. Alexandria functioned less like a military capital and more like a headquarters, a single port controlling how goods moved between 3 continents, with the Navy's only real job being to make sure nobody else's fleet could challenge that control. And when that fleet did put to sea together, dozens of warships clearing the Great Harbour in formation at once, it was as much a political statement as a military one, a visible reminder to every foreign merchant watching from the docks of exactly whose waters they were trading in. Walk down from the harbor into Alexandria's streets in the 3rd century BC, and you'd find yourself in one of the most genuinely mixed cities on Earth. Greek settlers filled the ruling class and the royal administration. Native Egyptians made up much of the older quarter. Rakotis, a fishing village that had stood there long before Alexander ever arrived. And Alexandria was home to one of the largest Jewish communities anywhere outside Judea itself, established enough that, sometime in the 3rd century BC, a group of Jewish scholars in the city undertook a project of their own, translating the Hebrew scriptures into Greek, a text later known as the Septuagint, produced not in Jerusalem but in Alexandria's own crowded multilingual streets. The harbor district ran on grain and papyrus. The Nile's floods produced grain surpluses reliable enough that Alexandria became one of the great breadbaskets of the Mediterranean, a role it would keep for centuries, eventually feeding Rome itself. Papyrus, meanwhile, was close to an Egyptian monopoly. The reed grew in the Nile Delta and almost nowhere else convenient to harvest at scale, meaning Alexandria effectively controlled the ancient world supply of what everyone used as paper. To bind that mix of cultures into something resembling a shared identity, the Ptolemies did something unusual. They invented a god. Serapis, a deliberately composite deity blending Greek and Egyptian religious traditions, got his own temple, the Serapeum, built specifically to give Greek and Egyptian residents a shared object of worship instead of two separate ones. Ptolemaic women, inheriting a mix of Greek and Egyptian legal tradition, held notably more property rights than most of their counterparts elsewhere in the Greek world, a legal foundation that, generations later, would let a line of Ptolemaic queens rule in their own right, ending with the most famous of them all, Cleopatra. For the wealthy, daily life meant townhouses in the Brucheion, the royal quarter near the palace complex. For the dock workers, sailors, and laborers loading grain ships and unloading incoming cargo, daily life meant the unbroken rhythm of a harbor that, by every account, never really stopped moving. And every so often, that rhythm gave way to spectacle. Ancient accounts describe a royal procession staged by Ptolemy II that wound through the city for the better part of a day. Elephants, camels, and exotic animals from across Africa, wine flowing from enormous ceremonial vessels, gilded statues carried on massive wheeled platforms, a public display of wealth so extravagant that ancient writers were still describing it centuries later, precisely because nobody who saw it forgot it. None of that trade meant anything if ships couldn't find the entrance in the dark. So the Ptolemies built a lighthouse, though lighthouse undersells it badly. Completed around 280 BC on the tip of Pharos Island, it rose in 3 tapering stages, square, then octagonal, then round, to roughly 330 feet, with a fire kept burning at the summit and, according to ancient sources, a system of curved metal mirrors that projected the light much further out to sea. And this is where a popular legend gets it wrong. Later, medieval writers claimed that same mirror could be turned into a weapon, angled to focus sunlight and burn enemy ships from miles away. It's a great story. It's also almost certainly just that, a story, added centuries after the lighthouse was already old, with no credible ancient source backing it up. What the mirror actually did was far less dramatic and far more useful. It kept a fire visible to sailors for longer than a flame alone ever could. Every night, tenders hauled fuel up an internal ramp to keep that fire burning until dawn. A small, unglamorous job that quietly kept the busiest port on Earth from losing ships in the dark. Nothing built by human hands would stand taller than the Pharos for well over 1,000 years afterward. It survived the fall of the Ptolemies, the arrival of Rome, the arrival of Islam, before a run of earthquakes between the 12th and 14th centuries finally broke it apart and dropped most of it straight into the harbor it had guided ships into for 1,600 years. A city built on trade and precision engineering also built something almost nobody expects. An institution that tried, quite literally, to collect a copy of every book that existed anywhere in the known world. The museum and its attached library, founded under the early Ptolemies, employed scholars on royal salary to research, translate, and copy texts, arriving from every ship that docked in the harbor. Ships were reportedly searched for books, which were copied before being returned, sometimes with the copy going back to the owner and the original staying in Alexandria. The result was a research institution that produced Euclid's foundational work on geometry, Eratosthenes' startlingly accurate calculation of the Earth's circumference using nothing but shadows and geometry, and generations of scholars editing and preserving Greek literature that would otherwise have been lost entirely. And here's a second myth worth correcting. The library did not vanish in one dramatic fire, whether set by Caesar, by religious zealots, or by conquering armies, depending on which ancient blame-shifting account you read. The real decline was slower and less cinematic. Centuries of reduced funding, gradual loss of prestige, and successive partial damage, until an institution that once tried to hold all the world's knowledge in one building simply faded out of the historical record. No single villain. Just time, the least dramatic ending imaginable for the most ambitious library the ancient world ever built. The lighthouse sat on an island. The city sat on the mainland. Connecting them, the Ptolemies built one of the largest engineering projects of the ancient Mediterranean, a stone causeway nearly a kilometer long called the Heptastadion, the 7 stadia after its length. It wasn't just a bridge. By running a solid wall of stone between the mainland and Pharos Island, it split Alexandria's coastline into 2 purpose-built harbors in a single move. A great harbor for the royal fleet and major trade to the east, and a second harbor, Eunostos, safe return for everyday shipping to the west. Over the centuries, silt built up around the causeway until it stopped being a bridge and simply became ground. Which is why, if you visit Alexandria today, you're not looking across water to find where Pharos Island used to be. You're standing on it. The peninsula never went away. The sea around it just gave up. Ptolemaic Alexandria didn't get demolished. It got shaken apart. A series of earthquakes and at least one major tsunami between roughly the 4th and 14th centuries AD dropped enormous sections of the ancient waterfront, palace fragments, temple pieces, harbor walls, and eventually the lighthouse itself, straight into the eastern harbor, where they sat mostly undisturbed for over 1,000 years. Picture the moment itself. Centuries of accumulated stonework along the waterfront, cracking and folding into the sea within minutes, columns toppling into the harbor, dust rolling across water that had carried 1,000 ships without incident for generations. Nobody seriously went looking until 1994, when French archaeologist Jean-Yves Empereur led the first major underwater survey near the old Kate Bay Fortress and found thousands of architectural fragments scattered across the seabed. Column drums, statue fragments, and massive dressed stone blocks bearing unmistakably Ptolemaic tool marks. The lighthouse hadn't disappeared. It had just changed address, and the recovery is still happening. In 2025, teams pulled 22 more blocks off the seafloor, including door lintels weighing up to 80 tons apiece and a previously uncatalogued carved pylon in Egyptian architectural style. Researchers are now using 3D scanning to digitally rebuild the lighthouse piece by piece from a monument that's been underwater longer than most countries on Earth have existed. Alexander picked a stretch of empty coastline for one reason: the geometry worked. 3 centuries later, that geometry had produced the busiest harbor, the biggest warships, the tallest building, and the largest library on the planet. And then the sea and time took almost all of it back. What's strange is that we're not done finding it. New blocks are still surfacing. The digital reconstruction isn't finished. Somewhere under that harbor, there's still more of the Kaboto's arsenal that's never been properly excavated. So here's the question worth sitting with. If a wonder of the ancient world could sit underwater in front of a major modern city for 600 years before anyone thought to look, what else might still be down there that nobody's started looking for yet? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you want to keep seeing the ancient world exactly as it actually stood, subscribe, because we're just getting started rebuilding it one city at a time.